The marble floors of the Whitmore mansion gleamed under my cloth for the third time that morning. I'd been working as their housekeeper for 6 months, and I still couldn't get used to how pristine everything had to be. At my previous job, a little dust never hurt anyone. But here, every surface had to sparkle like it was waiting for a magazine photo shoot. "Mrs. Peterson, could you come upstairs, please?" The voice belonged to Mr. Richard Whitmore himself, echoing down from the second floor. My stomach dropped. In 6 months, he'd barely spoken 10 words to me directly. When the billionaire CEO of Whitmore Industries needed something, he usually went through his assistant or the head of household staff. I climbed the curved staircase, my sensible shoes silent on the thick carpet. The walls were lined with family portraits, Richard with his late wife, Catherine, pictures of their son, David, at various ages. Catherine had died in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving Richard to raise their 8-year-old son alone. Well, not exactly alone. He had a team of staff, including me. I found him standing outside David's bedroom door, and for the first time, I saw something other than cold professionalism in his face. He looked lost. "David won't come out," he said quietly. "He's been in there since yesterday evening. Won't eat, won't talk to anyone. The nanny quit last week, and He ran a hand through his dark hair. "I don't know what to do." I could hear muffled crying through the heavy wooden door. My heart ached for the little boy inside. I'd seen him around the house, always polite, always quiet, but with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. "May I try?" I asked. Richard looked surprised, then desperate enough to nod. I knocked gently. "David, it's Mrs. Peterson, the lady who cleans your room. Can I come in?" Silence. "I brought some of those chocolate chip cookies from the kitchen," I lied smoothly. "The ones Cook makes special on Tuesdays, but I need someone to help me eat them, or they'll go stale." More silence, then a small voice. "I'm not hungry." "That's okay. I'm not really hungry for cookies either." I was actually hoping for someone to talk to. Sometimes grown-ups need friends too, you know. The lock clicked. The door opened a crack, revealing one red-rimmed eye. "You're sad too?" David whispered. My throat tightened. "Sometimes, honey. Everyone gets sad sometimes." The door opened wider. David stood there in wrinkled pajamas, his blonde hair messy, looking nothing like the perfectly groomed child I usually saw at breakfast. "Daddy says I have to be strong because I'm the man of the house now that Mommy's gone," he said. "But I don't want to be strong. I want to cry. But crying is for babies." I glanced back at Richard, who was frozen in the hallway, his face pale. Then I knelt down to David's level. "Can I tell you a secret?" I whispered. "I cry sometimes too, and I'm definitely not a baby. I'm 45 years old, and I still cry when I'm sad or scared or happy." "You cry when you're happy?" "Oh yes. When something wonderful happens, sometimes happy tears come out. It's like your heart is so full it overflows." David considered this. "I cried happy tears when Mommy brought me ice cream last summer, before she went to heaven. Those sound like perfect happy tears," I said softly. "And sad tears are perfect too. They help wash away some of the hurt so you can feel better. Will you sit with me while I have sad tears?" "Of course." I spent the next hour in David's room while he cried, talked about his mother, and gradually started eating the cookies I'd actually sent the cook to fetch. Richard appeared in the doorway several times, watching with an expression I couldn't quite read. By the end of our conversation, David was laughing at my stories about my own son Michael, who was now 22 and working in Colorado. I told him about the time Michael tried to bake me a birthday cake when he was David's age and accidentally used salt instead of sugar. "It was the worst cake in the world," I said, making David giggle. "But it was also the best cake in the world because he made it with love." "I want to make Daddy a love cake," David said suddenly, "even if it's terrible." I think that's a wonderful idea. When I finally tucked David into bed that night, something that had apparently been a battle for weeks, Richard was waiting in the hallway. "Thank you," he said simply. I haven't seen him smile since, well, in a long time. He's a special boy. He just needed someone to listen. The nanny agencies keep sending people, but no one seems to understand him like you do. I felt a flutter of something dangerous in my chest. I should get back to work. "Hannah," the use of my first name stopped me cold. "Would you consider taking on some additional responsibilities with David? I'll double your salary." The smart thing would be to say no. The professional thing, the safe thing. But the hope in his eyes matched the hope I'd seen in David's, and I'd never been good at ignoring children who needed help. "I'll think about it," I said. What I didn't say was that I'd already made up my mind the moment David had looked at me with those sad, trusting eyes. I was going to help that little boy heal, even if it meant crossing lines I'd never crossed before, even if it meant risking my heart in ways I hadn't since my divorce 5 years ago, even if it meant falling for a man so far out of my league that we might as well live on different planets. But as I walked back down those marble stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. And for the first time in years, change didn't terrify me. It excited me. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know if you've ever found yourself in an impossible situation that somehow felt exactly right. The next morning, I found David waiting for me in the kitchen at 6 a.m., fully dressed and holding a wooden spoon like a sword. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm ready to make the love cake for Daddy." Cook nearly dropped her coffee mug. "Child, what are you doing up so early?" "David," I said gently, tying an apron around his small waist, "let's start with something a little easier than cake. How about we make your daddy's favorite breakfast?" "Does Daddy have a favorite breakfast?" David asked, and the question broke my heart. This little boy barely knew his own father beyond the polite exchanges at the dinner table. Let's find out together. When Richard came down an hour later, expecting his usual black coffee and whole grain toast, he stopped dead at the sight of David standing proudly beside a plate of pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. "I made them myself," David announced. "Mrs. Peterson helped, but I cracked the eggs and everything." Richard's face went through several emotions before settling on something soft and amazed. "You made these for me?" "They're love pancakes, like the cake, but easier." Richard sat down and took a bite. I watched his throat work as he swallowed, and I realized he was fighting back tears. "These are the best pancakes I've ever had," he said quietly. "Really? Better than the ones at that fancy restaurant?" "1,000,000 times better." David beamed and climbed into the chair next to his father, something I'd never seen him do before. Usually, he sat at the far end of the long dining table while Richard read the financial news on his tablet. "Mrs. Peterson said we can make different shapes tomorrow. Maybe rockets." "That sounds perfect," Richard said. And for the first time since I'd known him, his smile reached his eyes. Over the next few weeks, my role in the household shifted in ways that both thrilled and terrified me. Officially, I was still the housekeeper, but increasingly, I found myself becoming David's caregiver, homework helper, and confidant. Richard had stopped interviewing nannies. "You're better with him than any of the professionals," he told me one evening after I'd helped David with a school project about butterflies. We'd built a caterpillar habitat in the garden, and David had spent an hour telling his father all about metamorphosis during dinner. "I'm not trained in child development or education," I protested. "No, but you understand him. That's worth more than any degree." The compliment warmed me more than it should have. I tried to remind myself that this was just a job, that Richard was grateful for my help with his son, nothing more. But it was getting harder to ignore the way he looked at me sometimes, or the way conversations between us had started extending long past what was necessary. Like the night I found him in his study at midnight, staring at legal documents. "Everything okay?" I asked from the doorway. He looked up, startled. "Hannah, you should be home. David had a nightmare." I stayed to make sure he settled back down. I'd started keeping some clothes in the staff quarters for nights like these. "What's keeping you up?" He gestured at the papers spread across his mahogany desk. "Catherine's family is challenging the custody arrangement. They think David would be better off with his grandparents." My blood ran cold. "Can they do that?" "They're claiming I'm an unfit father, that I work too much, that I don't provide emotional stability." His laugh was bitter. "They're not wrong. That's ridiculous. You love David." "Do I? Sometimes I think he'd be happier with people who actually know how to talk to children. People like you." The vulnerability in his voice made me step closer. "Richard, you should see the way David's face lights up when you praise his pancakes or listen to his butterfly facts. He doesn't need perfect parents. He needs parents who show up." "Is that your secret?" "Just showing up? That's every parent's secret. My ex-husband never figured that out." It was the first time I'd mentioned my divorce to him directly. Richard's eyes sharpened with interest. "You were married long?" 15 years. He decided he wanted a younger model when I turned 40. The old hurt had dulled to a manageable ache. Michael was 17 when we divorced, old enough to choose which parent to live with. He chose you. He chose the parent who'd been showing up for soccer games and science fairs for 17 years. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Catherine's parents think I should remarry. Someone from our social circle who understands the expectations. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. Is that what you want? I want David to be happy. I want him to have someone who makes pancakes with him and helps him cry when he needs to cry. I want... He stopped, shaking his head. It doesn't matter what I want. But the way he was looking at me suggested it mattered very much. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following month. Richard threw himself into proving he could be a good father, which mostly meant spending more time with David and less time at the office. I watched their relationship blossom as they built blanket forts, played board games, and worked together in the garden. But I also saw the strain on Richard's face when he thought no one was looking. The weight of possibly losing his son. The pressure from his late wife's family and his own board of directors, who thought his reduced work schedule was affecting the company. "Mrs. Peterson," David said one afternoon while we were baking cookies, "is Daddy in trouble?" "What makes you ask that, sweetheart? He looks scared sometimes, like when I have bad dreams." Out of the mouths of babes. Grown-ups get scared too sometimes. "But your daddy is very strong, and he has people who care about him." "Like you?" The innocent question stopped my hands mid-stir. "Yes, like me." "Good, because I think Daddy needs more people to care about him. He was very lonely before you came." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I knocked on Richard's study door at 11 p.m. carrying 2 cups of tea. "I've been thinking about the custody case," I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "Hannah, you don't need to worry about... I want to testify." He stared at me. "What?" "I want to testify about what kind of father you are. About how David has flourished since you started spending time with him. About the man I see when you read him bedtime stories and help him with his math homework. They'll tear you apart. Catherine's family has expensive lawyers who'll make you look like hired help with no credibility. Let them try." I met his eyes steadily. "I've raised a child. I know what good parenting looks like, and I know what David needs. If my testimony can help keep you two together, then I'm going to give it." The gratitude in Richard's expression was so intense it took my breath away. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why would you put yourself through that for us?" I could have given him a dozen professional reasons. I could have talked about David's well-being or my duty as an employee. Instead, I told him the truth. "Because you're both important to me. More important than they should be." The air between us crackled with something dangerous and wonderful. Richard stood up, came around the desk, and for a moment I thought he might kiss me. Instead, he stopped just inches away, his hand almost touching my face. "Hannah, I know," I whispered. "I know it's complicated. It's impossible. Maybe. But some impossible things are worth fighting for." The next morning, I woke up to find David missing from his room and Richard pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "Where is he?" I demanded. Richard's face was granite. "Catherine's parents. They picked him up for what was supposed to be a day visit. That was yesterday morning." My heart stopped. "They took him?" "Their lawyer called an hour ago. They're claiming I'm emotionally unstable and that David asked to stay with them permanently." I knew that was a lie. David would never willingly leave his father, especially not now when they were finally building a real relationship. But as I looked at the legal documents Richard showed me, I realized we were in deeper trouble than either of us had imagined. The custody battle had just become a war. The law office smelled like leather and desperation. I sat in the waiting room while Richard met with his attorney, my hands clenched in my lap. 3 days had passed since David's disappearance, and every hour felt like a lifetime. When Richard finally emerged, his face was grim. "They're claiming David told them he's afraid of me," he said as we walked to his car. "That I've been having mood swings and outbursts since reducing my work schedule. That's insane. David adores you. They also have a witness who says I've been engaging in inappropriate behavior with household staff." The words hit me like ice water. "What kind of inappropriate behavior?" Richard's jaw tightened. "The kind that involves a lonely widower and his attractive housekeeper." I felt sick. Someone's been watching us. Apparently, they have photos of us in my study late at night, of you staying overnight when David had nightmares, of us talking in the garden. We weren't doing anything wrong. Try explaining that to a judge who sees a billionaire and his employee in what could be interpreted as compromising situations. The betrayal burned in my chest. Someone in that house, someone I'd trusted, had been documenting our every interaction, twisting innocent moments into something sordid. Who? I asked. We don't know yet, but whoever it is has been thorough. That evening, I sat in my small apartment staring at the walls. For the first time since this all started, I considered walking away. Richard could find another housekeeper, one who wouldn't complicate his custody battle. David would be hurt, but he'd recover. My phone rang. Mrs. Peterson? The small voice made my heart clench. David! Sweetheart, where are you? Are you okay? I'm at Grandma and Grandpa's house. They won't let me call Daddy, but I snuck their phone. He sounded scared and confused. They keep asking me questions about you and Daddy. They say Daddy might be sick, and that's why he acts different now. Your daddy isn't sick, David. He's just learning how to be the best daddy he can be. I know that. I told them about our pancakes and our butterfly garden and how Daddy reads me stories now. But they said those things don't matter. My heart broke for this little boy caught in the middle of adult machinations he couldn't possibly understand. David, listen to me carefully. You haven't done anything wrong, okay? Whatever the grown-ups are fighting about, it's not your fault. I want to come home. I want to make love pancakes with you and Daddy. I know, baby. We're working on it. Mrs. Peterson, are you going to leave like the nannies did? The question destroyed me. No, David, I'm not going anywhere. Promise? I promise. After I hung up, I called Richard. David just called me. He's scared and confused, but he's okay. Relief flooded Richard's voice. Thank God. What did he say? I relayed the conversation, including David's questions about me leaving. Hannah, Richard said quietly, maybe you should consider it. Stepping away, I mean. Your involvement is only giving them more ammunition. Are you firing me? I'm trying to protect you. This is going to get ugly. It's already ugly, and I told David I wouldn't leave. Don't make promises you might not be able to keep. His words stung, but I understood the fear behind them. Richard was terrified of losing his son, and I was a complication he couldn't afford. But I was also David's best chance at coming home. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to work and drove to the offices of Catherine's family attorney. The receptionist looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. Mr. Hartwell doesn't meet with domestic staff. Tell Mr. Hartwell that Hannah Peterson is here to discuss the Whitmore custody case. Tell him I have information he'll want to hear. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from James Hartwell, a silver-haired man with cold eyes and an expensive suit. Ms. Peterson, I understand you work for my client's son-in-law. I did. I quit this morning. His eyebrows rose slightly. Professional disagreement? You could say that. I leaned forward. I know what you're trying to prove about Richard Whitmore, and I'm here to tell you that you're right. For the first time since I'd entered his office, Hartwell looked truly interested. Go on. Richard has been acting inappropriately, making advances, creating uncomfortable situations. David has witnessed some of it. I hated every word that came out of my mouth, but I forced my expression to remain neutral, even slightly vindicated. This is quite a serious allegation. You're willing to testify to this under oath? Absolutely. In fact, I recorded some of our conversations. I was planning to sue for sexual harassment, but then this custody thing started, and I realized David's welfare was more important than my settlement. Hartwell's eyes gleamed. I'd like to hear those recordings. Of course, but I want something in return. What kind of something? I want to see David, to make sure he's okay. And I want assurance that when this is over, he'll be placed somewhere safe. Richard Whitmore is a dangerous man, Mr. Hartwell. That little boy has been through enough. It was the performance of my lifetime. Every word was a lie designed to make Hartwell believe I was exactly what he needed, a disgruntled employee with evidence against Richard. But it was also a calculated risk that could backfire spectacularly. I think we can arrange a meeting with David, Hartwell said slowly. As for the recordings, I'll need guarantees about David's safety first, and I'll need to see him alone. If you're really concerned about his welfare, you'll understand why I can't trust anyone involved in this mess. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Catherine's parents' living room while David threw himself into my arms. "Mrs. Peterson, you came!" "Of course I came, sweetheart." Margaret Whitmore, Catherine's mother, watched us with sharp eyes. "David's been asking for you constantly. It's been quite disruptive. I'm sorry about that. Children need consistency during difficult transitions." "Yes, well, he'll have to adjust. We can't have him clinging to inappropriate attachments." I bit back my real response and focused on David, who was chattering about the big house and the cook who made vegetables he didn't like. "Mrs. Peterson," he whispered when Margaret left the room, "when can I go home? Grandma says Daddy is sick, but he didn't look sick when I left." "David, I need you to listen very carefully. Some grown-ups are confused right now about what's best for you. But I promise you that everyone who loves you is working very hard to fix this. Do you love me?" "Oh, sweetheart. Yes, I love you very much. And Daddy loves me?" "Your daddy loves you more than anything in the world. Then why can't we all be together?" It was the question I'd been dreading. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that love isn't always enough? That sometimes the law and money and old hurts matter more than what's in your heart? Sometimes grown-ups make things more complicated than they need to be, I said finally. But love always finds a way to win in the end. I hoped I was right. That evening, I met with Hartwell again. This time bringing a small recording device with what sounded like compromising conversations between Richard and me. What he didn't know was that I'd enlisted my son Michael's help. Michael worked in audio production and had helped me create realistic-sounding dialogue using clips from old voicemails and carefully edited segments. It wouldn't hold up under forensic analysis, but it didn't need to. It just needed to buy me time and access. "This is quite damning," Hartwell said, listening to Richard making inappropriate comments about my appearance. "There's more where that came from, but I want to see David again. I'm worried about him." "That can be arranged. In fact, Mrs. Whitmore was wondering if you might consider taking a temporary position as David's caretaker while we sort this mess out. The boy seems attached to you, and it might ease his transition." It was exactly what I'd hoped for. I suppose I could consider it, for David's sake. As I left Hartwell's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Haven't heard from you. Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Working on something. Trust me." His response came immediately. "Always." 2 words that carried the weight of everything we couldn't say, everything I was risking by playing this dangerous game. But as I drove through the night toward an uncertain future, I held on to one unshakable truth. David Whitmore was going home to his father, no matter what it cost me. The hardest part was going to be convincing Richard to trust me when it looked like I'd betrayed him completely. Living in the Whitmore family mansion as David's caretaker while secretly working against them was like walking through a minefield blindfolded. Every conversation was a potential trap. Every moment with David a reminder of what we all stood to lose. Margaret Whitmore treated me with the cold courtesy reserved for necessary evils. "David seems calmer with you here," she admitted after I'd been there a week, "though I don't understand his attachment to someone so temporary." "Children form bonds quickly," I replied carefully, "especially when they're grieving." "Yes, well, he'll need to learn to rely on family instead of hired help." If only she knew that the hired help was planning to destroy her case from the inside. David and I had settled into a routine that felt both natural and heartbreaking. I helped him with homework, read him stories, and listened to his questions about why he couldn't go home. "Grandma says Daddy is too sad to take care of me properly," he told me one afternoon while we worked on a jigsaw puzzle. "But Daddy wasn't sad when we made pancakes. He was happy. Your daddy has been very sad since your mommy died," I said carefully. "But that doesn't mean he can't take care of you. Sometimes sad people just need extra help learning how to be happy again. Like when I was sad and you helped me? Exactly like that. So Daddy just needs someone to help him too? Your daddy has lots of people who want to help him. The problem is that some other grown-ups think they know better than your daddy does about what you need." David frowned. "That's silly. I know what I need. I need Daddy, and I need you, and I need to go home to our butterfly garden." Out of the mouths of babes. That evening, Margaret cornered me in the kitchen. Mr. Hartwell tells me you have some concerning information about David's father. I've shared what I felt was necessary for David's protection, I said neutrally. Good. Richard always was too impulsive. Catherine worried about that, especially after David was born. She felt he was too focused on business to be a proper father. This was news to me. She said that? Many times. She even spoke to our attorney about modifying their wills to ensure David would come to us if anything happened to her. Unfortunately, she died before those changes could be made. A chill ran down my spine. You mean Catherine wanted you to have custody? Margaret's smile was sharp. Catherine wanted what was best for David. She knew Richard would never be able to balance fatherhood with his responsibilities to the company. I excused myself and called Richard from my room that night. Hannah, thank God. I've been going crazy not knowing what's happening. I can't talk long. Richard, did Catherine ever express concerns about your parenting abilities? A long silence. Where is this coming from? Just answer me, please. Catherine thought I worked too much. She worried that David would grow up the way I did, with nannies and boarding schools instead of real family time. But she never suggested, Hannah, why are you asking this? Because Margaret Whitmore just told me Catherine spoke to an attorney about changing her will to give custody to her parents. That's impossible. Catherine and I discussed our wills extensively. She insisted that David stay with me no matter what happened to either of us. Then either Margaret is lying or Catherine was hiding something from you. The implications hung between us like a toxic cloud. Hannah, where exactly are you right now? I'm staying at the Whitmore house, as David's temporary caretaker. What? His voice was sharp with alarm. How is that possible? Why would they hire someone who was supposed to testify for me? This was the moment I'd been dreading. Richard, I need you to trust me. I know how this looks, but Jesus Christ, Hannah, please tell me you haven't switched sides. The hurt in his voice cut deeper than any accusation could have. I'm exactly where I need to be to help David, I said firmly. But I can't explain everything right now. I just need you to trust me for a little longer. Trust you? You disappear for a week, then call to tell me Catherine might have been planning to take away my son, and now you're working for the people trying to destroy me. What exactly am I supposed to trust? I closed my eyes, knowing how this must look from his perspective. Trust that I love David. Trust that I understand what's at stake. And trust that everything I'm doing is to bring him home to you. Hannah, I have to go. Someone's coming. I hung up and opened my door to find David standing in the hallway in his pajamas. Mrs. Peterson? I heard voices. Were you talking to Daddy? My heart ached at the hope in his eyes. No, sweetheart. I was talking to my son Michael. The lie came easily, but it tasted bitter. Oh, I thought maybe. He shrugged, trying to look nonchalant and failing completely. Come here. I pulled him into a hug. I know you miss your daddy. Every day. Do you think he misses me? Oh, David, your daddy misses you so much it hurts. Then why doesn't he come get me? How do you explain legal battles and custody hearings to an 8-year-old without terrifying him? Sometimes grown-ups have to follow rules that don't make sense, I said finally. But those rules don't change how much your daddy loves you. 2 days later, Hartwell called with news that made my stomach drop. We've had the recordings analyzed by our forensic expert, he said. Very impressive work, Miss Peterson. I kept my voice steady. I'm glad you find them useful. Useful enough that we're moving for emergency custody based on the evidence. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow. Tomorrow. I'd run out of time. That night, I made a decision that would either save David or destroy any chance I had of helping him. I called Richard. Hannah, thank God I haven't slept in... Richard, listen to me very carefully. Tomorrow morning, Catherine's parents are going to court with evidence that you've been behaving inappropriately with me. What kind of evidence? Recordings, audio of conversations between us that sound compromising. But we never... Hannah, we've never even kissed. I know. The recordings are fake. A long silence. Then, you made fake recordings? Why would you do that unless you're working with them? I'm working against them. Richard, I've been living in their house for a week, gaining their trust, trying to find something that could help us. And did you? Find something? Maybe. Margaret mentioned that Catherine spoke to an attorney about changing her will. If we can find proof that Catherine never actually wanted to change custody arrangements, or that Margaret is lying about her daughter's wishes, it's not enough. Richard said flatly. Not against doctored recordings that make me look like I was taking advantage of my employee. The recordings won't hold up under serious scrutiny. They're good, but they're not perfect. By the time anyone realizes they're fake, I'll have already lost David. He was right, and we both knew it. Richard, I said quietly, there's something else I need to tell you. Christ, what now? I'm going to testify tomorrow. For their side. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Richard, you're going to testify that I behaved inappropriately with you. Yes. And you're doing this to help me. Yes. Hannah, I think you'd better explain exactly how destroying my reputation is going to help me get my son back. I took a deep breath. This was my last card to play, and if I was wrong, I'd lose everything. Because, I said, I'm going to tell them the truth about why I made the recordings, and the truth is going to set David free. What truth? The truth about what kind of man you really are. The truth about how much David loves you. And the truth about how far a mother will go to protect a child who isn't even hers. For the first time since this nightmare began, Richard's voice carried a note of hope. Hannah, if this backfires, then we'll have lost together instead of alone. And if it works, I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. Then David comes home, and we figure out what happens next. What about us? After tomorrow, regardless of how this turns out, everyone will know how I feel about you. My heart stopped. How do you feel about me? Like I'm falling in love with a woman who's willing to risk everything for my son. Like I'm terrified of losing both of you. Like maybe impossible things really are worth fighting for. Tomorrow would determine whether love really could conquer all, or if some battles were too big for even the strongest hearts to win. The courthouse felt like a cathedral of judgment, all marble columns and echoing footsteps. I sat in the witness waiting room, my hands trembling slightly as I reviewed my testimony one last time. Everything depended on the next few hours. David was somewhere in the building with a court-appointed guardian, probably confused and scared. I'd seen him briefly in the hallway, and the way his face lit up when he spotted me nearly broke my resolve. He'd started toward me before Margaret Whitmore pulled him away, whispering something that made his shoulders slump. Richard arrived with his attorney, looking haggard but determined. When our eyes met across the crowded hallway, I saw a mixture of trust and terror that mirrored my own feelings. He'd chosen to believe in me despite every logical reason not to. Now I had to prove that faith wasn't misplaced. Ms. Peterson? A bailiff appeared at my elbow. You're up. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but filled with tension that seemed to press against my chest. Richard sat at the defendant's table, his knuckles white as he gripped a pen. Across the aisle, Margaret and Harold Whitmore looked smugly confident, flanked by their expensive legal team. Judge Patricia Morrison was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd been presiding over family court for 20 years, according to the research I'd done, and had a reputation for cutting through legal maneuvering to focus on what was best for the children involved. Ms. Peterson? Attorney Hartwell began smoothly. You worked as a housekeeper in the Whitmore residence for approximately 6 months. Is that correct? Yes. And during that time, you had extensive contact with both Mr. Whitmore and his son David. Yes. Can you describe the nature of your interactions with Mr. Whitmore? This was it, the moment everything hinged on. Mr. Whitmore was professional in the beginning, I said clearly. But over time, his behavior toward me changed. I felt rather than saw Richard tense at his table. Changed how? He began requesting that I work late hours. He would find excuses to speak with me privately, often in his study. He made comments about my appearance and personal life. Hartwell nodded encouragingly. Did these interactions make you uncomfortable? Very uncomfortable. And did you document any of these encounters? Yes. I recorded some of our conversations because I was concerned about where his behavior was leading. We've had those recordings analyzed by forensic experts, Your Honor, Hartwell told the judge. They confirm Ms. Peterson's testimony about Mr. E. Whitmore's inappropriate conduct. Judge Morrison frowned. I'll want to review those recordings myself. Continue. Ms. Peterson, did young David witness any of these inappropriate behaviors? He did. There were occasions when Mr. Whitmore would speak to me inappropriately in front of David, or when David would find us in situations that could be misinterpreted. I hated every word, but I forced myself to continue. Can you give the court an example? One evening, David had a nightmare. I was comforting him when Mr. Whitmore appeared. Instead of checking on his son, he made a comment about how I looked in my nightgown. David was right there. The lie tasted like poison, but I saw Hartwell's satisfied expression and knew he was buying it completely. In your professional opinion, was David's well-being being affected by his father's behavior? David was confused and sometimes frightened. He would ask me questions about why adults acted the way they did. He was witnessing things no child should see. Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Your witness, Richard's attorney, James Crawford, was a sharp man with kind eyes. He stood slowly, and I braced myself for what came next. Ms. Peterson, these are very serious allegations you're making. Yes, they are. And you documented them because you were concerned? That's right. Yet you continued working in the Whitmore household for months after this alleged inappropriate behavior began. Why? Here it was, the question I'd been waiting for. Because of David, I said simply. Can you elaborate? David was a grieving child who needed stability. Whatever was happening with his father, David still needed someone who cared about him. I couldn't abandon him. So, despite feeling uncomfortable and allegedly documenting inappropriate behavior, you prioritized David's well-being? Yes, that seems like the action of someone who cares deeply for the child's welfare. I do care about David. Crawford moved closer. Ms. Peterson, in all your time caring for David, did you ever see Mr. Whitmore hurt him? Physically or emotionally? No. Did you ever see Mr. Whitmore behave inappropriately toward his son? No. Did Mr. Whitmore ever prevent you from caring for David or interfere with your relationship with the boy? No. In fact, he encouraged it. He encouraged your relationship with his son? Yes, he said I understood David better than anyone. Ms. Peterson, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. In your honest assessment, is Richard Whitmore a good father to David? This was the moment. Everything I'd planned, everything I'd risked, came down to this single answer. I looked directly at Richard, then at the judge. Mr. Whitmore is an excellent father who was learning to connect with his son after a devastating loss. Yes, he made mistakes. Yes, he was sometimes awkward in his attempts to reach David. But never once did I see him act out of anything but love for that little boy. The courtroom erupted. Hartwell shot to his feet, objecting loudly. Margaret Whitmore's face went white with shock and rage. Ms. Peterson, Judge Morrison said sternly, your testimony seems to contradict your earlier statements. Your Honor, my earlier statements were true as far as they went, but they weren't the whole truth. I don't understand. I took a deep breath. Your Honor, I need to confess something. The recordings I made were fabricated. The courtroom exploded in chaos. It took Judge Morrison several minutes and her gavel to restore order. Ms. Peterson, are you saying you created false evidence? Yes, Your Honor. Why would you do such a thing? Because I wanted access to David. I wanted to make sure he was safe and to understand what was really happening in this custody battle. And what did you discover? I discovered a little boy who misses his father desperately. A little boy who talks about pancake breakfasts and butterfly gardens and bedtime stories. A little boy who knows exactly where he belongs. I turned to face Margaret and Harold Whitmore. I also discovered that Mrs. Whitmore has been less than truthful about her daughter's wishes regarding David's custody. Hartwell was on his feet again. Your Honor, this woman has just admitted to perjury and fabricating evidence. Nothing she says can be trusted. Perhaps, Judge Morrison said coldly, but I'm curious to hear what she has to say. Continue, Ms. Peterson. Mrs. Whitmore told me that Catherine spoke to an attorney about changing her will to give custody to her parents. But when I pressed for details, she couldn't provide the name of this attorney or any documentation. When I asked David about his relationship with his grandparents before his mother died, he barely remembered visiting them. That proves nothing, Margaret snapped. You're right, I agreed. But it made me wonder what else you might not be telling the truth about. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small recording device, a real one this time. This is a recording of Mrs. Whitmore speaking to me 3 nights ago. I think the court should hear it. Crawford looked as surprised as everyone else, but he quickly moved to have the recording admitted as evidence. Margaret's voice filled the courtroom, clear and unmistakable. The truth is, Hannah, we never expected Richard to fight this hard for custody. Catherine always said he was too selfish to put David's needs first. We thought he'd be relieved to let us take responsibility for raising the boy. David deserves better than a father who sees him as an obligation. The recording continued with Margaret detailing their strategy to paint Richard as an unfit father, including their plan to find evidence of inappropriate behavior with household staff. Of course, we never expected to find someone willing to fabricate evidence for us. Margaret's recorded voice continued with a laugh. Though I suppose the money we're paying you makes it worthwhile. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Your Honor, I said quietly, I never took a penny from the Whitmores, but I let them believe I was working for them so I could document their real intentions. Judge Morrison looked like she was considering holding everyone in contempt. Ms. Peterson, you've admitted to fabricating evidence and deceiving this court. You've engaged in espionage and entrapment. Why should I believe anything you've said? Because, Your Honor, at the end of the day, this isn't about me or the Whitmores or even Mr. Whitmore. This is about David, and David should be with his father. I looked at Richard, whose face showed a mixture of amazement and something that might have been love. Your Honor, I've seen Richard Whitmore at his worst moments, grieving, frightened, unsure of himself. I've also seen him at his best, patient, loving, learning to be the father David needs. He's not perfect, but he's David's father, and David needs him. The judge was quiet for a long moment. I'm going to recess for 1 hour while I review all the evidence presented today. When we return, I want to speak to David privately. This child's voice needs to be heard above all the adult drama that's been playing out in my courtroom. As the courtroom cleared, Richard appeared at my side. Hannah, what you just did was probably illegal in 12 different ways, I finished. Was the bravest thing I've ever seen. Richard, I need you to know that if this doesn't work, if you lose David because of my methods. He silenced me with a kiss that was soft and desperate and full of everything we'd been too afraid to say. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. Hannah, win or lose, I love you. I love what you did for David. I love that you were willing to risk everything for us. And I love you, I whispered back, both of you. An hour later, we returned to face Judge Morrison's decision. David sat in the witness chair, looking small but determined. The judge had spoken with him privately, and now his clear voice carried throughout the courtroom. I want to go home to my daddy. I want to make pancakes and take care of our butterflies and have Mrs. Peterson read me stories. I don't want to live with Grandma and Grandpa anymore. They're nice, but they don't understand about love pancakes. Judge Morrison smiled for the first time all day. Mr. Whitmore, you'll have full custody of your son, effective immediately. Mrs. and Mr. Whitmore, you'll have supervised visitation rights once a month, pending a psychological evaluation. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I nearly collapsed. But as we left the courthouse, I knew our real challenges were just beginning. David fell asleep in my arms during the car ride home, exhausted from the emotional trauma of the hearing. Richard kept glancing at us in the rearview mirror, his expression cycling between relief, gratitude, and something deeper that made my heart race. Is Mrs. Peterson coming home with us? David had asked as we buckled him into the car seat. We'll see, buddy, Richard had replied, but his eyes met mine with a question that had nothing to do with employment arrangements. Now, as we pulled into the circular driveway of the Whitmore mansion, everything looked different. This wasn't my workplace anymore. After what had happened in court, after everything I'd revealed and risked, we'd crossed into territory none of us had mapped before. Let me carry him, Richard said softly as I started to lift David from his seat. I watched him cradle his son, and the tenderness in his face made my throat tight. This was what I'd fought for. This moment, this reunion, this family finding their way back to each other. Inside the house, the staff who'd remained loyal during the custody battle welcomed us with subdued celebration. Cook had prepared David's favorite dinner, even though he was too tired to eat much of it. The gardener had maintained our butterfly habitat, and David's room was exactly as he'd left it. But as we tucked David into his own bed for the first time in 2 weeks, the weight of unresolved questions pressed down on us. Mrs. Peterson, David murmured sleepily. Are you going to stay now? Forever? Richard and I exchanged glances over David's head. We'll talk about it tomorrow, sweetheart, I said gently. Right now, you just need to rest in your own room with your daddy close by. Promise you'll be here when I wake up? I promise. After David fell asleep, Richard and I stood in the hallway, suddenly awkward with each other. The adrenaline from the courthouse was wearing off, leaving us to confront the reality of what came next. Would you like some coffee? Richard asked formally. That would be nice. We walked to the kitchen in silence, both of us hyper-aware of how different this felt from all our previous late-night conversations. Then, we'd been employer and employee dancing around growing attraction. Now we were... What exactly? Hannah, Richard said as he poured coffee into 2 mugs. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. My stomach clenched. Okay. When you told the court you love me, was that part of your strategy? Another performance to help the case? The question hit me like a physical blow. Richard, because I need to know. After everything that's happened, after all the lies and manipulations, even the ones meant to help, I need to know what's real between us. I set down my coffee mug and turned to face him fully. What's real is that I fell in love with you watching you learn to be David's father. What's real is that I've spent the last month terrified of losing both of you. What's real is that I would do everything I did again, including the parts that could have landed me in jail, because you and David are worth any risk. His shoulders sagged with relief. Thank God. Because I've been in love with you for weeks, and the idea that it was all one-sided was killing me. It's not one-sided. But Richard, we need to talk about what this means practically. I know. He ran a hand through his hair. Christ, where do we even start? We start with David. Everything else is secondary to what's best for him. Agreed. And what do you think is best for David? I considered the question carefully. Stability, consistency, time to heal from the trauma of the custody battle. And honestly, he needs to see that the adults in his life can have healthy relationships. So you think we should... I think we should take this slowly. David's been through enough upheaval. If we're going to explore what's between us, we need to do it carefully. Richard nodded, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. And in the meantime? In the meantime, I stay, as David's caregiver, officially. We give him time to adjust to being home, and we give ourselves time to figure out how to navigate this. That sounds incredibly reasonable and mature, Richard said wryly. I hate how much sense it makes. I laughed, despite everything. Welcome to dating in your 40s. Everything comes with complications. Is that what we're doing? Dating? Eventually, I hope so. But first, we heal. All of us. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and carefully orchestrated. I moved back into the staff quarters, but my role had evolved far beyond housekeeper. I was David's caregiver, homework helper, and emotional support system. I was Richard's co-parent, confidant, and the woman he looked at with barely contained longing across the dinner table every night. The media attention from the custody case died down gradually, though we still received occasional calls from reporters wanting to interview the housekeeper who'd helped win the Whitmore custody battle. I declined them all. David's privacy was more important than any opportunity for 15 minutes of fame. Margaret and Harold Whitmore exercised their supervised visitation rights exactly once before deciding that David was too influenced by his father's poor choices to be worth the effort. Their rejection hurt David initially, but with consistent love and support, he began to understand that their limitations weren't his fault. Sometimes grown-ups are too hurt by their own sadness to love properly, I explained to him one afternoon as we worked in the butterfly garden. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. Is that what happened to Daddy when Mommy died? He was too sad to love properly? The insight took my breath away. Something like that, yes. But your daddy learned how to love properly again, didn't he? Because you helped him. Because you helped him, I corrected. You and your love pancakes and your butterfly facts and your big heart that never gave up on him. David beamed at this, and I realized he was finally starting to understand his own worth in his father's healing journey. Richard was changing too. The man who'd once worked 14-hour days now made sure to be home for dinner every night. He attended school events, helped with homework, and had developed his own bedtime ritual with David that involved elaborate stories about brave knights and wise dragons. You're a different father than you were 6 months ago, I observed one evening after David had fallen asleep to a tale about a dragon who taught a young prince the importance of kindness. "I'm a different man than I was 6 months ago," Richard replied. "You changed me, Hannah. Both of you did. You changed yourself. We just gave you reasons to want to." These conversations were becoming more frequent and more charged. The careful boundaries we'd established were straining under the weight of our growing feelings for each other. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in November. David had fallen asleep on the couch during movie night, curled up between Richard and me like he was afraid we might disappear if he didn't keep us both close. Richard had carried him to bed, and I was cleaning up popcorn bowls when he returned to the living room. "Hannah," something in his voice made me look up. "I can't do this anymore." My heart stopped. "Do what?" "I pretend that I'm not completely in love with you. Pretend that I don't want to kiss you every time you smile at David. Pretend that I don't dream about you every night and wake up wishing you were in my bed instead of the staff quarters." The raw honesty in his voice made my knees weak. "Richard, I know we agreed to take things slowly. I know David needs stability. But I need you to know that slow is killing me." I set down the popcorn bowl with shaking hands. "It's killing me too. Then why are we doing this to ourselves? Because we're trying to be responsible adults who put David's needs first. And what if David's needs include having 2 people who love him and each other create a real family together?" The words hung in the air between us, full of possibility and terror. "Is that what you want?" I asked quietly. "A real family? More than I've ever wanted anything." Richard crossed the room slowly, giving me time to stop him, but I couldn't move. When he reached me, he cupped my face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "Hannah, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness, and your terrible plan that somehow saved my son. I love the way you make David laugh, and the way you make me feel like I can be the man I want to be. I love you, and I want to build a life with you." "I love you too," I whispered. "So much it scares me." "Then stop being scared. Take a leap of faith with me." When he kissed me this time, it wasn't the desperate kiss of 2 people stealing a moment. It was the kiss of 2 people choosing each other, choosing to build something beautiful and complicated and real. We broke apart to find David standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Are you and Mrs. Peterson going to get married?" he asked, matter-of-factly. Richard and I stared at him, then at each other. "What would you think about that?" Richard asked carefully. David considered this with 8-year-old seriousness. "I think Mrs. Peterson should live here all the time, not just in the staff house. And I think we should make love pancakes every Sunday. And I think—" He paused, suddenly shy. "I think it would be nice to have a mom again. Even if she's different from my first mom." My eyes filled with tears. "David, you know I could never replace your mother, right? I would never try to." "I know. But maybe I could have 2 moms? One in heaven and one who makes pancakes with me?" Richard's arms came around both of us, and for the first time in months, everything felt perfectly, simply right. "I think," Richard said softly, "that sounds like the perfect family to me." But as we stood there in our first embrace as an almost family, I couldn't shake the feeling that our hardest challenges still lay ahead. Building a life together was going to require more than love. It was going to require faith, patience, and the courage to keep choosing each other every single day. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, with David bouncing on our bed at 6 a.m. like he was spring-loaded. "It's Christmas! It's Christmas! Wake up, wake up!" Richard groaned and pulled a pillow over his head. "David, it's barely sunrise." "But Santa came. And Mrs. Peterson, Mom Hannah, said we could open presents after breakfast." Mom Hannah. The title still made my heart skip every time David used it. We'd been married for 2 months, a small ceremony in the garden with just David, my son Michael, and a few close friends. David had insisted on being the ring bearer and had taken his duties very seriously. "All right, buddy," Richard said, sitting up and ruffling David's hair. "Let's go make those Christmas morning love pancakes." As we made our way to the kitchen, I marveled at how natural this felt. A year ago, I'd been alone in my small apartment, wondering if I'd ever have a family again. Now I was part of something I'd never even dared to dream about. The first few months of our marriage had been an adjustment for all of us. David had needed time to process having a stepmother, especially one who'd been his caretaker first. There had been moments of confusion, testing boundaries, and working through the complex emotions that came with blended families. "Sometimes I feel guilty for being happy," David had confided to me one night after a particularly difficult day at school where kids had asked pointed questions about his new mom. "Guilty about what, sweetheart?" "About forgetting Mommy Catherine. About loving you. About wanting you to stay forever." My heart had broken for this little boy carrying such heavy feelings. "David, love isn't like a pie where you only get so many pieces to give out. Love grows. The love you have for your first mom doesn't get smaller when you love me too. It just means your heart is big enough for both." "Really? Really? And I think your mom, Catherine, would be happy that you found someone else to love you and take care of you." "Do you really think so?" "I know so. Because that's what moms want most, for their children to be loved and safe and happy." Now, watching David expertly crack eggs into the pancake batter, I saw a child who'd found his equilibrium. He talked about his first mom with love and without the desperate sadness that used to overwhelm him. He called me Mom Hannah with natural affection. He was thriving in ways that made my heart full every single day. "Mom Hannah," David said as we shaped the pancake batter into Christmas trees, "after we open presents, can we call Michael and tell him about my new bicycle?" Michael had struggled initially with my remarriage, not because he disliked Richard or David, but because he'd worried about his own place in my life. It had taken several long conversations and a visit where he got to see our family dynamic firsthand before he'd relaxed into the idea of having a stepfather and stepbrother. "Of course we can call Michael," I said. "He's excited to hear about your Christmas." "Good. I want to tell him about the butterfly house Daddy and I built for you in the garden too." The butterfly house had been their joint Christmas project, a beautiful glass structure where I could continue the butterfly garden year-round. It was also symbolic, a place where transformation and beauty could flourish in any season. After presents and a leisurely breakfast, Richard and I found ourselves alone in the living room while David played with his new train set. "Any regrets?" Richard asked, pulling me close on the couch. "About marrying a man who gives his 8-year-old son power tools for Christmas?" "Never," I said, kissing his jaw. "The toolkit was age-appropriate," he protested, "and you should have seen his face when he opened it." I did see his face. I also saw him immediately start planning modifications to his treehouse that would require an engineering degree. He gets that from me. The engineering brain, or the complete disregard for safety regulations? Both, probably. I laughed, settling more comfortably against his side. This was my favorite time of day, when David was happily occupied and Richard and I could just be together without the demands of work or household management. "Hannah," Richard said quietly, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "David asked me yesterday if we were going to have a baby." My body went still. We talked about the possibility before we got married, but only in abstract terms. I was 46 now, and while it wasn't impossible, it wasn't exactly ideal timing either. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that was something the grown-ups needed to discuss, but I've been wondering what you think about it." I considered the question carefully. "What do you think about it?" "I think David would be an amazing big brother. I think you'd be an incredible mother to a baby. I think I'd love the chance to experience pregnancy and those early years with you." He paused. "But I also think we have something pretty perfect already. So you'd be happy either way?" "I'd be happy either way." "But Hannah, if you want a baby, if that's something you need to feel complete, then that's what I want too." The generosity of his answer made my eyes water. I spent so many years thinking my chance for more children was over. When I married you, I thought David would be my gift, a child to love and raise even if he wasn't born to me. And now? Now I think maybe I'm greedy enough to want both. A stepson who's taught me that love really can multiply instead of divide, and maybe a baby who would be ours from the beginning. Richard's smile was radiant. "Greedy Hannah. I like the sound of that. But I also want to be realistic. I'm not 25 anymore. The risks? We'll talk to doctors. We'll be careful. And whatever happens, we'll handle it together." From the other room, David's voice rang out. "Mom Hannah! Daddy, come see what I built!" We went to admire his train track construction, which somehow incorporated his new building blocks, several stuffed animals, and a complex tunnel system that defied the laws of physics. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said sincerely. Tell us how it works." As David launched into an elaborate explanation involving cargo schedules and animal passengers, I caught Richard watching me with soft eyes. Later that evening, after David had fallen asleep surrounded by wrapping paper and new toys, Richard and I sat in the butterfly house he and David had built. Solar lights twinkled overhead, and the sound of a small fountain created a peaceful backdrop. "I called Dr. Martinez today," Richard said quietly. "Already? I wanted to make an appointment for us to discuss our options. If we're going to do this, I want to make sure we have the best possible care." I leaned against him, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. What if it doesn't happen? What if we try and it doesn't work out? Then we love the family we have. David, Michael, when he visits each other, that's already more than I ever dreamed of having. And what if it does happen? What if 9 months from now, we're sleep-deprived parents of a newborn while trying to manage an 8-year-old and your business? Then we'll be exhausted and happy and probably making a lot of mistakes, just like every other family. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, not easy, but simple. We love each other. We love David, and if we're blessed with another child, we'll love them too. Everything else is just details. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, divorced, working as a housekeeper, convinced that her life was settling into a quiet routine of work and occasional visits from her grown son. I could never have imagined the dramatic turns that led me here. Richard? Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't taken that job? If some other housekeeper had been there the day David locked himself in his room? Every day, he said seriously. And it terrifies me. Why? Because I know exactly what would have happened. David would have continued withdrawing. I would have failed him completely. His grandparents probably would have won custody, and I would have lost the most important person in my world. You would have figured it out eventually. You're a good man, Richard. I'm a good man now, because I have good people around me. But a year ago, I was lost, Hannah. Completely lost. You saved us. We saved each other. As if he'd heard us talking, David appeared in the doorway of the butterfly house in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "I had a dream," he said sleepily. "Good dream or scary dream?" I asked, opening my arms for him. "Good dream. I dreamed that we had a baby, and I was teaching her about butterflies, and she was really smart and asked good questions." He curled up between us. "Do you think we'll really have a baby?" Richard and I exchanged glances over his head. "Would you like that?" I asked. "I think it would be fun. Michael said having a little brother or sister is hard work, but also pretty cool. And I'm almost 9 now, so I'm old enough to help." "You are definitely old enough to help," Richard agreed. "You'd be an excellent big brother." "When can we find out if there's going to be a baby?" "Well," I said carefully, "first we have to try to make a baby. Then we have to wait and see if it works. Sometimes it takes a while, and sometimes it doesn't work at all." David processed this with typical 8-year-old logic. "So we should start trying soon, so we don't run out of time." Richard choked back a laugh. "That's very practical thinking, buddy." "I am very practical. Mom Hannah says so." As we sat there in the warm glow of the butterfly house, Richard, David, and me, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not because our family was finished growing, but because I finally understood that family isn't about biology or legal documents or even living under the same roof. Family is about showing up. It's about choosing each other every day through pancake breakfasts and custody battles and ordinary Tuesday evenings. It's about making space for new love without diminishing old love. It's about believing that impossible things really can come true if you're brave enough to fight for them. 6 months later, I was staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test while David and Richard waited anxiously outside the bathroom door. "Well?" Richard called. I opened the door with tears streaming down my face. "We're going to need a bigger butterfly house," I said. David whooped with joy, and Richard swept me into his arms, spinning me around until we were all dizzy with laughter and possibility. Some love stories end with the wedding. Ours was just beginning. The labor pains started at 3 in the morning, appropriately dramatic for a child who would be born into our family of storytellers and fighters. Richard woke instantly when I gripped his arm. 18 years of single parenthood having trained him to wake at the slightest sound of distress. "Is it time?" he asked, already reaching for the hospital bag we'd packed weeks ago. "I think so," I panted through another contraction. We should call your mom to come stay with David. Richard's relationship with his own mother had improved dramatically since our marriage. Linda Whitmore had been skeptical of me initially, the housekeeper who'd married her billionaire son. But David had won her over completely. Now she spoiled her grandson shamelessly and had declared herself ready to be the best grandmother to our new baby. David appeared in our doorway, hair sticking up at impossible angles. "Is the baby coming now?" "Yes, sweetheart," I managed between breaths. "Grandma Linda is going to come stay with you while we go to the hospital. Can I come too?" Babies are born in a special part of the hospital where only mommies and daddies can go, Richard explained gently. "But as soon as your sister is born, you'll be the first person we call." Sister. We'd found out the gender at the 20-week ultrasound, and David had immediately started making lists of girl names and planning how to teach her about butterflies and trains and all his other interests. "I still think Emma Catherine is the best name," David said seriously, as another contraction gripped me. "Emma for new beginnings, and Catherine so she has a piece of her angel sister too. Emma Catherine." We'd been debating names for months, but when David had suggested honoring his first mother, both Richard and I had known immediately that it was perfect. The next 8 hours were a blur of hospital rooms, breathing exercises, and Richard holding my hand while I cursed his entire genetic line during the difficult contractions. At 47, this pregnancy had been closely monitored, but everything had progressed normally until the final weeks when Emma had decided to turn breech. "We're going to need to do a C-section," Dr. E. Martinez announced after examining me. "The baby's position makes vaginal delivery too risky." I'd prepared myself for this possibility, but the reality still scared me. Richard's face went pale, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Whatever's safest for Hannah and the baby." An hour later, Emma Catherine Whitmore made her entrance into the world with a furious cry that announced her displeasure at being evicted from her warm, comfortable home. She had Richard's dark hair and my stubborn chin, and when they placed her on my chest, I felt the same overwhelming rush of protective love I'd experienced when I first held Michael 23 years ago. "She's perfect," Richard whispered, tears streaming down his face as he touched her tiny fist. "Hannah, she's absolutely perfect. She looks like you," I said softly, studying the tiny features of our daughter. "But I think she has my attitude about being woken up too early." Emma's cries had settled into indignant hiccups, and her eyes were trying to focus on our faces. I'd forgotten how impossibly small newborns were, how every breath seemed like a miracle. "Should we call David?" Richard asked. "Give me 5 more minutes," I said, not ready to share this moment yet. "I want to remember this, just the 3 of us." But Emma had other plans. Her cries grew louder and more insistent, and nothing we did seemed to comfort her. "She's hungry," the nurse said with a knowing smile. "First babies are always eager to eat." As I attempted to nurse Emma for the first time, fumbling through half-remembered techniques from Michael's infancy, I was struck by how different this felt. When Michael was born, I'd been 24 and terrified, convinced I'd break him if I held him wrong. Now, at 47, I felt calmer, more confident in my ability to figure things out. "You're a natural," Richard said, watching Emma finally latch properly. "I'm just older and less panicked than I was the first time." "No, it's more than that. You were born to be a mother, Hannah. I see it every day with David and now with Emma." 2 hours later, David burst through the hospital room door like a small hurricane, followed by a beaming Linda Whitmore carrying enough flowers to stock a garden center. "Where is she? Where's my sister?" David demanded, then stopped short when he saw the tiny bundle in my arms. His voice dropped to an awed whisper. "She's so small. Would you like to hold her?" I asked. David nodded solemnly, and Richard helped him settle into the chair beside my bed. With infinite care, we placed Emma in her big brother's arms. "Hi, Emma Catherine," David whispered. "I'm your big brother David. I've been waiting for you for a really long time." Emma opened her eyes at the sound of his voice, and I swear she looked directly at him. David's face lit up with wonder. "She knows me. Did you see? She knows I'm her brother." "Of course she knows you," I said gently. "She's been hearing your voice for months while she was growing." "I told her stories every night," David said proudly, "about our butterfly garden and the train set we're going to build together and how I'm going to teach her to make love pancakes." Linda Whitmore wiped away tears as she watched her grandson meet his new sister. "Richard, she's beautiful. She looks just like you did when you were born. She's going to be trouble, Richard said fondly. I can already tell. We spent the next 3 days in the hospital, learning Emma's rhythms and adjusting to being a family of 4. David visited every day after school, always bringing something new to show his sister. A drawing he'd made, a flower from the garden, a book he wanted to read to her. Michael flew in from Colorado the day before we were scheduled to go home, and watching him meet his new baby sister was almost as emotional as watching David hold her for the first time. She's so tiny, Michael said, cradling Emma with the practiced ease of someone who'd helped with cousins and friends' babies over the years. And she has your stubborn expression, Mom. Everyone keeps saying that. I think you're all seeing things. Trust me, I know that look. I spent the first 18 years of my life trying to get around it. Michael had fully embraced his role as oldest brother, bringing practical gifts like baby-safe toys and offering to help with night feedings when he visited. At 23, he was mature enough to appreciate the miracle of new life and secure enough in my love to welcome Emma without jealousy. Coming home from the hospital was surreal. The house looked exactly the same, but everything felt different with Emma in it. David had insisted on helping prepare her nursery, which adjoined our bedroom and was decorated with butterflies and soft pastels. This is where you live now, Emma, David explained seriously as we showed her the nursery for the first time. That's your crib, and those are your butterflies on the wall, and this is the rocking chair where Mom Hannah will feed you and read you stories. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the constant worry that comes with being responsible for such a tiny, vulnerable life. But they were also filled with moments of pure magic. Emma's first smile, the way she calmed instantly when David sang to her, the expression of wonder on Richard's face every time he held his daughter. I'd forgotten how incredible this stage is, Richard said one night as we took turns walking with a fussy Emma. With David, I was working so much that Catherine handled most of the night feedings. I missed so much. You're not missing anything now, I pointed out, noting his rumpled pajamas and the spit-up stain on his shoulder. No, I'm not, and I never will again. Richard had cut his work schedule even further after Emma's birth, delegating more responsibilities to his executive team and refusing all travel for the first 6 months. His board of directors had initially grumbled, but Emma's arrival had humanized their CEO in ways that actually improved company morale and productivity. Daddy's the best baby whisperer, David observed one afternoon, as Richard managed to get Emma to sleep after I'd been trying unsuccessfully for an hour. He's had practice with you, I said, pulling David close for a cuddle while Richard settled Emma in her crib. Was I a hard baby? According to your dad, you were an angel baby who slept through the night at 8 weeks old. Really? Richard rejoined us on the couch, looking skeptical. That's not how I remember it. You had colic for the first 3 months and didn't sleep through the night until you were almost a year old. Then why did you tell me I was an angel baby? Because you were. Difficult doesn't mean not angelic, buddy. All babies are challenging sometimes. That's how they grow strong enough to take on the world. David considered this seriously. So Emma crying a lot means she's going to be strong. Emma crying a lot means she has healthy lungs and knows how to ask for what she needs, I said. Those are both good things. As the months passed, our family found its rhythm. David thrived in his role as big brother, always eager to help with diaper changes, bottle feedings, and entertaining Emma when she was fussy. He'd developed his own special relationship with her, complete with silly songs and games that never failed to make her laugh. Emma, meanwhile, was proving to be every bit as strong-willed as her genetics suggested. She had opinions about everything: what she wanted to eat, when she wanted to sleep, who she wanted to hold her. But she was also incredibly social, lighting up whenever David entered the room and studying everyone around her with intense curiosity. She's going to be a force of nature, Linda Whitmore predicted during one of her weekly visits, just like her mother. Hey, I protested mildly while Emma grabbed at my hair with surprising strength. I'm not a force of nature. Sweetheart, Richard said with a laugh, you fabricated evidence to infiltrate a custody case and then revealed the truth in open court to save a family that wasn't even yours yet. If that's not being a force of nature, I don't know what is. I prefer to think of it as being determined. Determined forces of nature run in this family, David said matter-of-factly. That's why we're all so good at getting what we want. On Emma's first birthday, we threw a party in the butterfly garden. The glass house Richard and David had built had been expanded to accommodate our growing family's needs, and it was filled with friends, family, and the sound of children's laughter. Emma sat in her high chair, demolishing her first birthday cake with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else in life. Her face was covered in frosting, her hair decorated with cake crumbs, and she was having the time of her life. "Make a wish for your sister," I told David as we prepared to blow out Emma's candles. David closed his eyes tightly, then opened them with a grin. "I wished that we'd always be this happy." "That's a perfect wish," Richard said, lifting Emma from her high chair despite the mess. "What do you think, Emma? Is David's wish going to come true?" Emma babbled something that sounded like agreement and grabbed Richard's nose with a frosting-covered fist. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and Emma was finally asleep, David, Richard, and I sat in the butterfly garden watching the sunset. "Mom, Hannah," David said thoughtfully, "do you remember when you first came to work here?" "I remember it very well. Did you know then that we were going to be a family?" I considered the question seriously. I knew that I cared about you and your daddy very much, but I couldn't have imagined how wonderful our family would become. "I knew," David said confidently. "The first day you helped me cry about Mommy Catherine, I knew you were going to stay forever." "How did you know that?" "Because you listened to me like parents listen. And you made Daddy smile again. And you weren't scared of loving us even when it was complicated." Richard reached over and took my hand, squeezing gently. "You know what I think?" he said. "What's that?" "I think some people are meant to find each other, no matter how impossible the circumstances seem. I think you were always meant to be David's mother and Emma's mother and my wife. We just had to go through some adventures to get here." "Adventures," I repeated with a laugh. "Is that what we're calling custody battles and fake recordings now? Adventures that led us home to each other." As we sat there in the gathering dusk, surrounded by butterflies and the sound of Emma's peaceful breathing through the baby monitor, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 2 years ago, I'd been a divorced housekeeper starting over at 45, convinced that my life was settling into a quiet routine. I'd had no idea that taking a job cleaning marble floors would lead to midnight conversations in a billionaire's study, to fighting for a little boy's right to stay with his father, to finding love in the most unexpected place. I'd learned that family isn't just about blood or law or even intention. It's about showing up day after day for the people who matter most. It's about choosing love even when it's complicated, even when it's scary, even when the whole world thinks you're crazy for trying. David had taught me that loving someone else's child can feel exactly like loving your own. Richard had taught me that second chances at love are just as powerful as first chances, maybe more so because they come with the wisdom of experience. Emma had taught me that it's never too late to start over, to become the person you were always meant to be. "I love you both," I said quietly, watching a butterfly land on David's shoulder. "All of you, more than I ever thought possible." "We love you too," David said simply. "That's what families do." And sitting there in our butterfly garden, surrounded by the evidence of transformation and new life, I knew he was absolutely right. Some stories end with happily ever after. Others end with happily ever after and then keep going, because real love doesn't stop at the wedding or the birth certificate or the custody decree. Real love keeps growing, keeps changing, keeps finding new ways to surprise you with its depth and resilience. Our story was one of those stories, and I couldn't wait to see what came next.